it's important as a fighter that you understand what your anaerobic threshold is. And I like to use the analogy of a sinking boat. Your anaerobic threshold is basically the point at which you can no longer supply your energy aerobically. So beyond this point, beyond this threshold, you're going to have to start slowing down. So the higher your anaerobic threshold, the more power you can maintain for a longer time. It's important as a fighter we understand what this point is, how to train for it, and whereabouts ours actually is. And we can test for this. To illustrate this, I like the analogy of a sinking boat. If you imagine you're in a boat with a hole in it, there's water coming in. But initially we can bail this boat out as quickly as the water's coming in, we can get the water back out again. So effectively you're not sinking. And this is kind of like the waste products coming into your muscle groups because there's not enough oxygenated blood to get rid of all the waste products as they're building up. So as the water's coming in, we're getting rid of it. And that's the same thing that your muscles do. When there's oxygenated blood coming through, you're getting rid of the waste products as they build up. So it's not that they're not there, it's just they're not building up to a point that are giving you a problem. But there becomes a point where the water's coming into the boat as quick as you're able to bail it out. And that point is your anaerobic threshold. So you're not sinking, but only by virtue of the fact that you're bailing it out as quickly as it's coming in. As soon as you tip over that point, the water's now coming in quicker than you can bail it out. So your boat is sinking. The further you push over that limit, the quicker you're sinking. The only way for you to recover is to reduce the amount of water coming in, to reduce the amount of waste products coming into your muscles. And the only way you can do that is by easing up your pace, by slowing up. Otherwise you're on borrowed time and you're going to have to stop at some stage. There's some testing we're going to do in the program to find out where your anaerobic threshold is, but it's typically between 80 to 90% of your maximum heart rate, so somewhere around a 7 or an 8 out of 10 on a rate of perceived effort scale. Here's an example of anaerobic threshold during 5 pad rounds at fight intensity. So here we have a graph with the heart rate there in beats per minute. So starting off nice and restful and then working up to a higher and higher intensity as we go along. This is the first round, this is the second pad round, third, fourth and fifth. And as we can see, the intensity of the rounds has basically gone up round by round, much like a fight would be. And this is fight pace pad work. I've set the border of the red line here to be approximately on this fighter's anaerobic threshold. So this first round was a nice easy round, just about got working to maximum aerobic output here. Beyond this point would have been a bit harder, would have had to have started slowing up. So this was the maximum power that this particular fighter could maintain aerobically. The second round, a portion of the fight now pushed beyond that a little bit and we had a bit of recovery, then pushed into it again and a bit more recovery. And as you can see now, the recovery on the heart rate was actually not a full recovery anymore. So this was more taxing. The start of the next round, we've pushed up and then pushed straight into a period beyond the anaerobic threshold. So this would have been hard work. And the fighter would have had to have slowed down by the end of it. The recovery was a bit more sporadic as well. And then we've hit the next round. Because that last round was a little bit harder, couldn't push in quite as hard. And then the final round, it was the final round, so this fighter's pushed really hard and gone pretty much up to maximal heart rate before having to recover again. This little glitch, incidentally, was probably the heart rate strap being knocked on the fighter's chest while they were working on the pads. So this gives you an overall idea of how a fight really would look like in terms of heart rate and that central fatigue, and where this fighter is pushing into or beyond their anaerobic threshold and how that's affected the pace and the recovery. So the greater your anaerobic threshold, the more power you can produce to overwhelm your opponent. And here's another way of looking at this. This chart looks at anaerobic power reserve, and we've got 4 different fighters here with differing amounts of maximum aerobic power in blue and maximum anaerobic power in red. So the blue portion, basically this line here, would represent each individual's anaerobic threshold. When they push beyond this level of power output, then they're going into borrowed time here. This is where their boat is sinking. So up to this point they can maintain this power output pretty easily. It's within their aerobic capacity. This red portion here would indicate the amount of explosive anaerobic power they've got. So this would be their strength and their knockout power. So if we compare these fighters across the board, we can see that this first fighter can just maintain over 8 watts per kilo of body weight here. So fighter 1 and fighter 2 are competing against each other. Fighter 2 could actually push the pace in their aerobic capacity higher and overwhelm fighter 1. If fighter 2 was pushing the pace up to their anaerobic threshold, so just on that red line on that previous graph, then fighter 1 would be struggling to keep up. They would be in their red zone when they're not quite there yet. So that would be making this fighter tire very quickly, whereas this fighter would be fine. Also, fighter 2 has a much more strength and power, so if they did choose to dip into this temporarily, they'd be able to really outgun in terms of the amount of power produced, and perhaps even win with a knockout, for example. This amount of aerobic power would also mean if fighter 2 pushed into this zone, they would recover much quicker between rounds and between bursts in the ring as well, whereas fighter 1 would be struggling because they haven't got the aerobic capacity to recharge themselves. So if we now look across the whole board here rather than just these two fighters, we can see that fighter number 3 has the worst conditioning. They're going to find that all of these fighters could push them beyond their anaerobic threshold and make them tire very quickly. They do have quite a bit of anaerobic power, mind you, so if fighter 3 and fighter 1 were competing, fighter 3 would find they've probably got more strength and power to demolish in a short burst fighter 1. The fighter with the best overall conditioning here though is fighter 4, so a very good level of maximum aerobic power, up to about 10 watts per kilo of body weight, which could see off all the other fighters if they decided to push the pace, and they would be fresh. They'd also find they can recharge very quickly between bursts and between rounds, but also if push came to shove and they were using their power, they actually produced more power than all the other fighters as well. So if technical issues were all even, this would be the best conditioned fighter. This fighter could push the pace and destroy all the other fighters on every front basically. This is the kind of conditioning we're pushing for.